The soft creak of the porch swing filled the air as I settled in beside him, the wooden slats still warm from the afternoon sun. It was one of those perfect summer evenings, the kind where the humidity finally breaks and the air feels like a gentle caress against your skin. Fireflies had just begun their nightly dance across the lawn, tiny lanterns blinking in and out of existence as twilight deepened around us. I've always loved this time of day, when the world seems to slow down and conversations become more meaningful, more honest somehow. Jake and I had been friends for almost 3 years now, ever since we'd been paired together for that environmental science project in college. I still remember how annoyed I was at first. He had this reputation for being the outdoorsy type who might not take the academic side seriously. But that first weekend, when we hiked out to collect water samples, and he identified every bird call we heard, I realized there was so much more to him than I'd assumed. He was passionate about nature in a way that was contagious, his eyes lighting up as he explained the ecosystem of the small creek we were studying. I'm more of the artistic type, always have been. My apartment is filled with half-finished canvases and sketchbooks, and I see the world through shapes, colors, and compositions. Jake teases me about how I can spend hours just watching how light changes on a subject, but there's always respect behind his words. That's what made our friendship work so well. We brought different perspectives to the table, yet somehow they complemented each other perfectly. The porch swing had become our spot over the past year. When Jake moved into this small house with the wraparound porch, he'd called me immediately, excitement bubbling through the phone. "You have to come see it, Eli," he'd said. "It's got this amazing porch swing that's practically begging for someone to sit on it with a cold drink and watch the sunset." That first evening, as we sat side by side with lemonade sweating in our glasses, I understood what he meant. There was something almost magical about this space, suspended between the privacy of a home and the openness of the outside world. Let me explain why this matters. This porch swing became more than just a piece of furniture. It transformed into our confessional booth, our thinking space, our refuge when life got complicated. We'd solved problems here, celebrated victories, nursed heartbreaks. The rhythmic swaying motion seemed to loosen our tongues, making it easier to share thoughts we might otherwise keep buried. In many ways, this swing knew more about us than anyone else in our lives. Our friendship had grown steadily over the years, weathering the typical storms of post-college life, career uncertainties, dating disasters, family dramas. Jake had been there when my grandmother passed away last year, showing up at my door with takeout and sitting with me in silence when words wouldn't come. And I'd supported him through his breakup with Melissa, the woman everyone thought he'd marry. We developed the kind of shorthand that close friends have, where a single look can communicate an entire conversation. But lately, something had been shifting between us. I'd catch him looking at me when he thought I wouldn't notice, his gaze lingering a beat longer than usual. There were moments when our hands would brush as we reached for the same thing, and instead of the casual contact of friendship, I'd feel a jolt of something more intense, more electric. I'd started to wonder if I was imagining it, projecting my own confused feelings onto innocent moments. Because the truth was, I had begun to see Jake differently too. I found myself noticing things I'd overlooked before. The way his forearms tensed when he pushed his hair back, the small dimple that appeared on only one cheek when he smiled, the gentle confidence in his movements. These observations would catch me off guard, making my heart race in a way that friends' hearts shouldn't race for each other. That evening on the porch swing had started like any other. We'd grilled burgers earlier, and now we were digesting and talking about everything and nothing. Jake was telling me about his plans to start a community garden project at the local elementary school, his hands animated as he described the plots he'd designed. I was half listening, half distracted by the way the setting sun cast golden highlights through his brown hair. "Earth to Eli," he said, nudging my shoulder with his. "You haven't heard a word I've said in the last 5 minutes, have you?" I blinked, embarrassed at being caught daydreaming. "Sorry, I was just thinking about how this light would be perfect for that landscape series I've been wanting to start." He laughed, that warm sound that always made me smile in response. Always the artist. I could be announcing the apocalypse, and you'd be analyzing the quality of light on the Four Horsemen. They'd make excellent subjects, I countered, grateful for our easy banter, especially if they posed dramatically on their horses. The conversation drifted then to my art, to the gallery showing I had coming up in a few months. Jake had always been my biggest supporter, even when my own confidence wavered. He asked thoughtful questions about my newest pieces, offering perspectives I hadn't considered. As night settled fully around us, the temperature dropped just enough to make me wish I'd brought out a light jacket. I rubbed my arms, trying to be subtle about it, but Jake noticed immediately. "Cold?" he asked, shifting closer to me on the swing. "I can grab you a hoodie from inside." "I'm fine," I said, though the goosebumps on my arms betrayed me. "Just a little chilly." He moved closer still, until our thighs were touching, and the warmth of his body next to mine sent a different kind of shiver through me. We continued talking, but there was a new awareness between us, a tension that hadn't been there before, or perhaps it had always been there, and we'd both been ignoring it. The conversation gradually slowed, comfortable silences stretching between topics. In one of these quiet moments, as we gently swayed back and forth, Jake turned slightly toward me. The porch light illuminated half his face, leaving the other half in shadow, and something in his expression made my breath catch. "Do you ever think about how things change?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "How people can know each other for years, and then suddenly see each other differently?" My heart began to pound so loudly I was certain he could hear it. "What do you mean?" He looked down, then back up at me, and I could see he was gathering courage for something. "I mean, sometimes friendship can be a starting point, not the destination." Before I could respond, he shifted again, and that's when it happened. He hooked 2 fingers in my belt and tugged. It was gentle, playful even, but unmistakably intentional. A question asked without words. Time seemed to suspend in that moment. The night sounds, crickets chirping, a distant dog barking, the soft whisper of leaves in the breeze, all faded away until there was nothing but the sound of our breathing and the creak of the swing. I looked down at his fingers, still loosely hooked in my belt, then back up to his face. His expression was a mixture of hope and vulnerability that made my chest ache. This was Jake, my friend, my confidant, the person who knew all my flaws and stayed anyway. And he was looking at me like I held his heart in my hands. "Jake," I whispered, not even sure what I wanted to say. He started to withdraw his hand, uncertainty clouding his features. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." I caught his wrist before he could pull away completely. "Don't apologize," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice despite the chaos of emotions inside me. "I've been thinking about it too." The relief that washed over his face was beautiful to witness. "Yeah?" he asked, a smile beginning to form. "Yeah," I confirmed, and then, because words suddenly seemed inadequate, I leaned forward and kissed him. It was nothing like I had imagined, and I had imagined it, in quiet moments I wouldn't admit to anyone. His lips were softer than I expected, and he tasted faintly of the lemonade we'd been drinking. There was a moment of adjustment, of surprise, and then he was kissing me back, his free hand coming up to cup my jaw with such tenderness that I felt something inside me break open. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious. He laughed softly. "I was terrified of ruining what we have. You're too important to me, Eli. The thought of making things weird between us and losing you completely, I couldn't risk it." I understood completely. I'd had the same fears, the same hesitations. "So what changed?" He sat back slightly, looking at me with a seriousness that made my heart skip. I realized that not taking the chance was its own kind of loss. I was already grieving something that hadn't even happened yet. His words resonated deeply with me. How many opportunities had I missed in life because fear held me back? How many connections had I denied myself because it felt safer to stay within familiar boundaries? "I'm glad you took the risk," I told him, reaching for his hand and intertwining our fingers. The simple gesture felt both new and completely natural at the same time. "Me too," he said, squeezing my hand. "Though I have to admit, I'm still a little terrified. This changes things between us." "It does," I agreed. "But maybe it changes them for the better." We talked for hours that night, the porch swing our cocoon as we navigated this new territory. Jake told me he'd first realized his feelings were shifting during a camping trip we'd taken 6 months ago. We'd been sitting by the fire, and I'd been enthusiastically explaining my theory about how different artists would interpret the same sunset. "You were so passionate," he said, and I just thought, I want to see the world through his eyes forever. My moment had come more recently, when Jake had defended my artwork to a particularly critical visitor at a small showing. The way he'd articulated what I was trying to achieve in my pieces, sometimes better than I could myself, had made me see him in a completely different light. As we shared these revelations, I realized how blind I'd been to what had been developing between us. All the signs had been there, the lingering glances, the excuses to touch, the way we prioritized each other above everyone else in our lives. Friends had even made jokes about us being an old married couple, which we'd laughed off while carefully avoiding each other's eyes. But now that the shift had happened, now that we'd acknowledged this attraction, this deeper connection, I wondered what would come next. Relationships changed people, changed dynamics. Would we lose the easy friendship that had been our foundation? Would romantic complications erode what made us work so well together? I can't hear you overthinking from here, Jake said, interrupting my spiral of concerns. I smiled sheepishly. That obvious, huh? You get this little crease between your eyebrows, he said, gently touching the spot with his finger. I've always found it adorable, but it usually means you're worrying about something. I'm just thinking about how this works now, I admitted. Do we date? Are we boyfriends? What do we tell people? What if it doesn't work out, and we lose everything? Jake considered this for a moment. What if we don't put a label on it right away? What if we just agree that we're us, Jake and Eli, but with the freedom to explore this new dimension? We don't have to figure everything out tonight. His practical approach calmed me. It was so typically Jake, thoughtful, measured, focused on the essential rather than getting lost in hypotheticals. That sounds reasonable, I agreed. Though at some point, people are going to notice if I start kissing you in public. He laughed, pulling me closer. Let them notice. The weeks that followed were a beautiful blur of discovery. We went on proper dates, dinner at restaurants where we'd eaten countless times as friends, but now with the electric undercurrent of romance. We held hands walking through the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. We kissed in the kitchen while making breakfast, against the door when saying goodbye, in the middle of sentences when words failed us. But the most meaningful moments still happened on that porch swing. It remained our sanctuary, the place where we could talk honestly about our fears and hopes for this evolving relationship. Jake admitted he worried his lack of artistic knowledge would eventually bore me. I confessed my concern that his more outgoing nature would eventually make him restless with my quieter tendencies. That's what I love about you, though, he said one evening, his arm around my shoulders as we watched a thunderstorm roll in from the safety of the covered porch. You see things deeply. You notice details others miss. Being with you makes me slow down and appreciate what's right in front of me. And you push me out of my comfort zone, I told him. You make me experience life instead of just observing it. Not everyone understood our transition from friends to partners. Jake's brother seemed confused, asking if this meant we'd been lying about being straight all these years. It's not about labels, Jake had explained patiently. It's about connecting with a person who happens to be Eli. My parents were supportive but concerned. Friendships and romantic relationships are different, my mother warned during a phone call. Are you sure you're not confusing closeness with attraction? I understood their concerns. Society tends to put relationships into neat boxes, friends in one, lovers in another, with clear boundaries between them. But Jake and I were discovering that the reality was much more fluid. Our friendship hadn't disappeared. It had deepened, enriched by this new dimension of physical and emotional intimacy. There were challenges, of course. Our first argument as a couple hit differently than our disagreements as friends. The stakes felt higher, the potential consequences more severe. We had to learn new ways of communicating, of resolving conflicts when a simple, let's agree to disagree, no longer felt sufficient. But there were unexpected joys too. I discovered that Jake sang softly to himself while cooking, something I'd never noticed during all our shared meals as friends. He learned that I kept a sketchbook of drawings just of him, hands, profile, eyes, dating back almost to when we first met. You've been paying attention all along, he said when he found it, a note of wonder in his voice. 6 months after that pivotal moment on the porch swing, we were back in the same spot, bundled up against the autumn chill. The trees had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and I'd been painting landscapes frantically, trying to capture the fleeting beauty before winter stripped the branches bare. Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if I hadn't tugged on your belt that night? Jake asked, his breath visible in the cool air. I considered this. I think we would have found our way here eventually, I said after a moment. Maybe not as quickly or directly, but I believe we were heading in this direction all along. He nodded, pulling me closer. I like to think so too, but I'm glad I didn't wait any longer. As darkness fell around us and the temperature dropped further, Jake stood up and held out his hand. Come on, it's getting cold. Let's go inside. I took his hand, but instead of following him immediately, I tugged him back toward me. Thank you, I said simply. For what? For being brave enough for both of us that night. For seeing what could be instead of just what was. He smiled, that special smile that I now knew was reserved just for me. Best risk I ever took, he said, leaning down to kiss me softly. As we headed inside, hand in hand, I glanced back at the porch swing, still gently moving from our departure. It was just a piece of furniture, wood and chain and cushions, but it had become so much more in our story. It was the place where friendship had evolved into love, where two separate paths had merged into one shared journey. The house lights cast a warm glow through the windows, promising comfort and connection inside. But I knew we'd be back on that swing tomorrow, and the day after, and for countless days to come. Some places hold magic, not because of what they are, but because of what happens there, because of the memories they contain and the possibilities they represent. Jake squeezed my hand as we stepped through the doorway together, and I squeezed back, a silent acknowledgement of how far we'd come and the journey still ahead. The porch swing would be waiting for us, ready to hold new conversations, new revelations, new chapters in our continuing story. And I couldn't wait to see what would unfold next, one gentle sway at a time. Total _char_count, 17,533.